Wow. So yeah, as you hear, I'm really inspired. Let's now you want to hear from the panel. Um, so I want to start with presenting Fanny. Are you with us?
Yes, I'm with you.
Hi, Fanny. Fanny Ejder is a Sustainable Development Advisor at the Nordic Council of Ministers, and I want you to feel really here with us. I know it's easy to feel a little bit alienated when you're online and everybody's in the room. So I'm going to give you a really good question just in a while, okay?
Perfect. I'm ready.
We also have Gabriel Lundström, who is as you met before, but he is still the head of ESG investment at SEB Life and the chairman of UN Global Compact Network Sweden. Welcome.
Thank you.
Then we have, ska vi se här, just den där, Marja Innanen, who is from Finland and the executive director of UN Global Compact Network Finland. Welcome, Marja.
Thank you.
And yes, there we have Kim Gabrielli, who is from Norway and the executive director of the network there. Welcome, Kim.
Thank you.
Did you say thank you?
Yeah, just said thank you. I
just
didn't
want
want
to
to take up time, but
I just want to check if the microphone was working.
It works.
Okay. And finally, but not least, we have Lena Westergaard, who is head of programs, human rights, diversity and inclusion, and anti-corruption at UN Global Compact Network Denmark. Welcome.
Thank you.
It works.
It does.
Yes, perfect. So I want to start by just going around with you as network heads here. In the dialogue with your members and when you're talking to the companies in your countries, what do you hear when it comes to what they are working with and what they need in terms of doing even better on sustainability, and maybe more specifically on just transition? And if you don't mind, we start in the reverse order. So,
Yeah.
Lena.
Thanks. Well, to answer your question and shed light on what it looks like for our Danish members, I'd like to just touch on two very different, slightly conflicting documents real quick, just to give you a picture. So one is a CEO statement from October 6 that came about when Global Compact Network Denmark, in collaboration with Maersk, brought together 12 larger companies, all committed to the science-based targets, to have a dialogue with our CEO and Assistant Secretary General, Sando Jambo, when she was here at that time. And what that statement really shows is that the business community in Denmark is extremely ambitious. They're calling on Danish politicians and government to maintain sustainability at the very top of their priorities, and while at the same time really acknowledging that the world is facing a multitude of challenges and disruptions. And what's interesting about this document in today's theme is that the just transition is explicitly mentioned several times. So there's that document. The other one I want to quickly touch upon is that today at 12 o'clock, the Danish Institute for Human Rights, they published their biannual snapshot of 30 of the largest companies in Denmark on their human rights due diligence performance, all of which are Global Compact Network members. And what's interesting about this report in today's light is that we're actually, and just turning back to also what Emily said, what you said, we have the toolbox. The toolbox is doing a robust human rights due diligence so companies can know and show their impact on people. That's what it's about. And this report unfortunately shows that there's not that much. I mean, companies still need support. They still need enablers from politicians. They still need learning environments, groups where they can learn how to concretely do due diligence that meets the standard of the UNGPs. So yeah, enough for now. But yes, that was my 2 cents.
They still need help with the due diligence.
Definitely,
definitely.
side. But we have the toolbox, and I do believe that the solution to a true just transition lies in robust human rights due diligence as the foundation for that work.
Thank you. Kim, what do you hear in Norway?
Let me try to point to three things. So first of all, what we call the regulation tsunami. So all of you in this room now are already feeling the pressure from your local, national politicians and the EU. It's a good thing, the new regulation, but it's also a challenging part, and especially for the medium-sized companies that perhaps don't have all the bright heads that some of the larger ones have. So there is a sort of a feeling of a lot of regulations coming, which is great in the area of transparency, in the area of social dialogue in many countries in the European Union, for example, but of course on climate and the taxonomy on social as well. So that's number one. Number two, I think we all are talking about some sort of value chain addiction. So in order to make this happen, we need to work with the whole value chain. And to just give you one example, so Hydro, one of the largest Norwegian companies, they have 25,000 suppliers. 25,000 suppliers. So how do you do that when you're expected to work on scope 3 indirect consequences and emissions? And number three, like you just said, Lene, there is a jungle. We call it a sustainability jungle of tools. Organizations, networks, initiatives. So what are you going to choose? We do believe that you are here today because you have perhaps chosen us to lead the way. And that's exactly what the UN Global Compact should do. Try to point out what are the best tools and how can you be ahead of the next regulation tsunami or wave that is coming. And of course also influence it in a positive way. So I think regulation tsunami and value chain addiction and sustainability jungles are at least some of the impressions I got today, and I also get currently in the Norwegian context.
Yep.
We can very much relate to that from other countries, but we don't put it that eloquently, I think. So now we remember it.
I have practiced.
Thank you. Maria, what do we hear from Finland?
Yeah, I don't repeat what you two guys said, but I would like to stress the government's role and the cooperation with the companies. You probably know that the Finnish government has very ambitious goal that Finland should be carbon neutral in 2035. And now over 14 sectors, business sectors, has done a carbon neutrality roadmaps together. And this is good example how really business has stepped up. But there's been a lot of discussion about just transition. The concept is new for every one of us, and I love the Maersk presentation. Just keep on rocking with your concept. It was fantastic. But for example, in our roadmaps, the just transition, it's not shown yet really as much as it should be seen. When the roadmaps are updated, maybe then also biodiversity aspects should be included in the roadmaps better. Finnish government has set up with the businesses some nice tools, for example, climate roundtable, where exactly these issues are talked about. And also we have a 2030 agenda roadmap where there is a 6 areas where systemic change should be done. And business and the government and all stakeholders worked with that roadmap, and also just transition was mentioned, but not actually, it wasn't, the work wasn't so concrete as it should be. So there's a lot to do still.
Rooms for greater understanding of the concept. Gabriel, Sweden.
Yes,
What are you hearing
Sweden.
from the
Yeah.
Swedish business?
Well, we recently published a report that I know that many of you in this room probably have heard about, or and hopefully even read it, where we asked 900 businesses in Sweden on sort of their challenges when it comes to transforming and future-proofing their business models. And the one thing that we also had a discussion before this meeting that stood out, that all agreed, both larger and smaller businesses, was that they want clarity from politicians on the direction. They want predictability. And working in the financial industry, I can relate to that. The markets are shaking up and down right now, and that's because the society is very unpredictable. And when you want to make big investments for future-proofing your business, you need to know sort of the conditions that, is not only present today but also tomorrow, and that they will be similar. If not, you don't dare to take the risks yourself as a company, and the investors and the financiers will not dare to go and take the risk with you either, right? So political stability and broad agreements cross sort of the political spectrum is crucial. Now we have recently had an election, for example, and what businesses don't want to see, no matter whether they're pro-right or left, they don't want to see too big changes when we have a new election. And I see my colleagues here from the other countries are nodding on that. So that's the predictability there, and broad political agreements on one. Other thing is competence. A lot of people are struggling with this. I mean, I wouldn't even say that we have any sort of clear comments from the business community around just transition. Just talking about transition is big enough, even though we see it's integrated on high levels, on senior levels, in especially the larger companies. The lower down the value chain you go, the less presence of the topic you see. So it's a lot of strategy right now, and varying sort of degree of action. So I'd say these are sort of the key takeaways that we've done from the report so far.
Thank you.
And also regulation is good and needed here. I'm getting also sort of a comment from my dear colleague Maria. Definitely agree on that, and that is a final thing that has been mentioned. Yeah.
But only EU level regulation. I mean, that for example, Finnish company, they don't want that the regulations are done nationally. They want exactly EU level regulation or global, and global means.
Yeah.
As you can expect as a non-EU member. But can I just one comment?
Yes.
Not joking. Of course, we all agree if we can have a even global regulation, that is the best. But on the other side, we have to do innovation in regulations as well. And then sometimes one country can try out some regulations that are afterwards scaled. So it doesn't always have to go from the global or the European level and down to the country level, but could also go the other way around, as we see it in the EU. So, but I'm sure we're coming back to this later. So
we are coming back. It's quite unheard of a business panel talking about that they want to get regulated. But I'm going to turn to Fanny now. But I can just say that we will get back to the politician's role and regulations, incentives, and what they can do to help accelerate just transition. So be prepared, because you're going to get the question as well. Fanny, how are you? Still there?
I'm good, thank you.
Still with us? Great.
Really, yes, I'm here. And really interesting to hear your discussion.
Yeah, so basically I've been reading some of your reports. You have really done a great job in trying to drill down and understand the implications of a green transition in the Nordic countries. And I just wanted to hear, after hearing the panel here, what your reflections are, and just pose the same question to you. Looking at the Nordic businesses, what do you hear? What is the trends and the needs from Nordic business according to you and the Nordic Council of Ministers?
Yes, I think it's thank you for the report that you've made, also the transition report. I think what we see in our reports is really in line with what you see in your report. We clearly see that businesses in the Nordic region wants long-term plans. They want the direction and vision that you're talking about in this panel as well. And of course, also, it's really great and really interesting to see that they want ambitious policy. They want, and of course, as you've been talking about, they want clear, consistent policy. And then a third thing, like support, guidelines, and trust is also needed because of this bureaucracy or what do you call it? The regulation tsunami. I think it's a good word for it. And of course, cooperation between government and businesses is really needed. One finding in our report that was really striking to me and really interesting to see is that we did a survey with the Nordic CEOs, and these CEOs stated that they were asking for stronger incentives from the politicians. They want higher climate ambitions. They want carbon prices to taxes on emissions or trading schemes, phasing out fossil fuels, prohibiting fossil fuels, and binding and transparent methodology on companies' climate reporting. This is really, really interesting to see. And I think all of this calls for bold policymakers that takes this and takes the decisions needed, ambitious sustainability and climate targets. We also, of course, have all really, really good targets in the Nordic region already, but still there's an urgency or the business urge for even more ambition in the work. And I think also maybe for the politicians to tell the hard facts also in this transition, that some companies might not get through to the other side, that we need to show that there are solutions for that as well, of how can, for example, those that are left unemployed be supported. And you were talking about capacity building and competence and so on. So there's, I think, talking about just transition, I see that the governments have a really important role to play here to ensure just transition where no one's left behind in this. And I know that the Nordic prime ministers are really interested in this topic as well on just transition. And we are now at the Nordic Council of Ministers creating a sort of policy toolbox for the Nordic countries of what can a just in transition entail in policies. I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, when will that be released? That sounds really...
We have, I think it's a 4-year project. So in 2024, we should get something from that project. And they're now creating, gathering knowledge from all of the Nordic countries. And I think this is something that could be really great to have, as I mentioned, cooperation on from the business side, also to get input on this.
Can you also guarantee that you will win the elections if you use the toolbox?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think hopefully, if the politicians work with just transition, that could be something that still they could win elections on. But I guess you're hitting the nail on the head there, that this is something where maybe we aren't seeing as ambitious and rapid changes at the policy level just because of that, of democracy and winning elections.
Yeah. Okay, so we've been talking about. Thank you, Fanny. We've been talking about the need for political leadership here. I want to take it one more level on specific. We can all agree that we need clear, predictable, ambitious climate policies, and also ensuring the just transition perspective. But more specifically, and I want to see if I can get up a Mentimeter question on the screen now. So let's use the wisdom of the room. You're going into www.menti.com, and there is a code here, 18925537, and then think about if there is any specific instruments or incentives you think can be efficient to promote a just transition, a Nordic just transition. So www.menti.com on your phones or your iPads or what have you, and then this code, and you will get to this question, and then if you think you can say something about what instruments and incentives you think can be effective. So we can all agree that we want political leadership, but more specifically, what kind of political leadership do we need? And while you're thinking and writing, I would like to pose the same question to you, Kim. I know you've been thinking about it.
Do you want me to
Yes.
answer?
Yes.
Yeah, I assume that some of the things I will say now is exactly the same you are choosing, but I was thinking how to group it, and of course, on one side, the finance, being it on taxes, subsidies, or support in the area of risk, because I think we are seeing that to get to the green shift, there will be red numbers, right? Because it's investments today, but we get the reward perhaps in 10 years in some of that, at least larger projects. So I think that is the first one. But the second one, which is coming back to, which is very much aligned with this, and that is regulation, policy, legislation that I see coming up here all the time. And I think I completely agree with Maria here that the most important actor in this area is the European Union. But let me speak of a couple of other examples, because there is also a transparency law on human rights in the supply chain coming out of the EU, but the conservative government of Norway adapted that a year ago. So it was actually entering into force this year in July. And the reason why I'm saying that is because, of course, it's based on the international cooperation, the OECD guidelines, etc. But it has also been transferred now to the new the red-green coalition in Norway. So we see a shift. It's independently of the governments, we get a new transparency law, which is great. Talking to the point that you were talking about, Gabriel, that we need predictability independent of governments. Then we got some really good news talking to what Fanny said. What could be in the Nordic policy box? What are ambitious policies? We got some really good news last Friday in the Norwegian context. In January, we had a CEO dinner with the largest companies in Norway together with the Minister of Trade. They all talked about science-based targets on climate. So they were all talking to him. We have been working on this with my colleagues, especially with our policy advisor here, Thomas, for 2 years to get science-based targets into the strategy on active ownership of the Norwegian government of the 70 state-owned companies. And last Friday, they actually decided that both science-based targets on climate and when it comes on nature is now a request for all 70 Norwegian state-owned, partially or holistically owned by the state. And this has huge impact because in the system of the science-based targets, you have to also request that from 67% of your suppliers. So 67% of the 20,000, 25,000 suppliers I talked about earlier. So I think this is just showing how the business community can be ahead of that. And just now we have a working group that works on what are criteria for transition plans or just transition plans. Because in the UK, the minister has decided in COP26 that all British companies over a certain size have to publish climate transition plans after 2 years. They are just working on the criteria in the UK, and we are trying to do the same to give inputs to our government. So basically, what I'm saying is that we have to, sort of recognize the importance of what is there already, but how does the business community take a position in advance of the tsunami coming to yet another area? And I think that is also what both your predictability study and what Fanny said, it shows. So, the business want to see politicians putting in regulations, but they also need to be part of it in order to make sure it's not too challenging or too difficult to actually apply.
Lene, Maria, Gabriel, Maria.
Yeah, I could build on that. Also in Finland, SBTs are trending.
Good.
But there's still few companies which are committed to SBTs, but nearly all companies want to be carbon neutral. So what does it mean? They speak about compensation. They want to do carbon offsetting. And we don't have rules or laws or guidelines for that. So they claim for customers and consumers, they present different claims. And now what we are really looking for is some kind of guidelines or ground rules for this issue also. And I know that our government is going to make some kind of guidelines for carbon offsetting. But in this case also, no national laws about it.
And Lena and Gabriel, you've been looking now on the results here a little bit. It's been EU due diligence, it's been tax, carbon and materials, not labor. It's been some really good, interesting suggestion here. Do you have any take?
I don't think there's much to add to all these great suggestions. I think my personal favorite is the one with support for SMEs. I think some of the larger companies already have the strength and maybe the long-term view to actually do a lot of the work themselves, but the SMEs, we really need to get them on board as the whole, to cover the whole value chains also of the bigger companies. So support and clear guidance for SMEs, definitely my favorite.
I have one comment as well, that is that more companies need to report. I think, I don't know, I wouldn't be surprised if it was someone from the financial industry saying that, but it could have been someone else as well. But what's very clear now is what's happening on the EU level is that the financial industry is regulated, and we need to do reporting, and we need to use a lot of reported data. Right? But the problem is we can't rely on the quality of the reported data. And in many cases, there is no data. So there are data providers, for example, providing data, which they've made their own analysis. Of course, you know, there's smart people doing it, but it's not reliable to the extent necessary when you're gonna lend money to a company or invest in a company. And that puts this whole system at risk. So I think reporting requirements need to go quite far. But right now, far in terms of extent on who's sort of covered, so even smaller SMEs. But when it comes to complexity and the number of data points, I'm questioning whether it's a little bit overambitious from that point of view right now. So that one I found very interesting. Taxes is of course one. It's hard to sort of have a stance on that when you're gonna be neutral, but it's clearly the fact that many people mention it as a powerful tool. And when it comes to the carbon tax, UN Global Compact globally is positive towards that. So that is what I can say. So, yeah.
Thank you, Gabriel. Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but you haven't forgot Fanny, I hope. She's still with us. And I'm going to ask the last question to you. And I didn't prepare you for this question, Fanny, so please forgive me.
More exciting that one.
So is there anything that we could label a Nordic approach to just transition in your research and in your dialogues with Nordic businesses and Nordic policymakers? Is there something unique Nordic in how we approach just transition?
I think the Nordic countries are still or the governments are so at the beginning of working with just transition. So I can say there's really a Nordic way of working with just transition, but many people are talking about the Nordic model and that these can be used to ensure just transition, that we have something to build on, that we can be front runners in this area. I think there's a seed and something to work with. So I'm optimistic, and hopefully we can see something, some concrete action on this in the coming years. But again, I think as this panel debate has shown, the business sector is really front runners and like pushing this agenda now. So I think that's really good and keeps me optimistic for what's ahead. But the governments have a lot of homework ahead of them to solve all of this.
Sure. Thank you, Fanny. Thank you, Gabriel. Thank you, Maria, Kim, and Lene. We give them a big hand. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andreas.